Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Plan B Success. Today, we have a unique guest who has his own podcast, My Perfect Failure, and let me jump in and have him come on board and introduce himself. Paul, why don't you take it away?
Good afternoon, Rajiv, or is it good morning? Because I know that I'm in the UK and you're the stateside, so
It's morning, yeah.
it's morning. Well, good morning to you, and thank you so much for having me as a guest on your podcast. I've listened to numerous episodes, which I love. So it's a unique honour to be a guest on your podcast. So as you've correctly said, I'm the creator, founder of the podcast My Perfect Failure, which has been pure joy putting it together and interviewing people and connecting with wonderful people, and it's kind of led us to connecting, which kind of sort of conveys my point.
Right. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then how you came about your podcast?
Okay, so just to give you some background on me, I'm I guess by profession, I work my background in the digital advertising profession. I've worked for a number of the UK leading publishers, sort of that's leading sort of newspapers. But more recently, I've sort of transitioned onto the tech side. So it's not a million miles away from sort of the publishers. I still connect with the publishers, but I sort of help the publishers make money. So I help publishers make money, but also I help ad agencies get away their budget so they can connect to the right audience using the wonderful assets and creatives that they have.
All right. When did you start your podcast?
Okay, so apologies. You did ask me to sort of convey how the podcast came about. So the podcast it kind of came about a couple of years ago. Actually launched it about a month ago. So I had my first sort of monthly birthday last week. So celebrated on my own with a cup of tea. Yeah, so the podcast came about from working in a startup. So I mentioned earlier that my background was in working for publishers. My first sort of foray onto the tech side, I was working for a startup, with wonderful people, and sort of quite a unique idea. But unfortunately, it didn't sort of translate to the success that we sort of hoped for. Ultimately, it sort of didn't work out for me, and while it wasn't working out, I sort of got it. I sort of realised it wasn't sort of translating into what I'd hoped it was, and also I guess what the founders and whatnot had hoped. And at that time, I sort of had this thought to myself: how do people recover from failures when things aren't going according to plan? Because we always everybody has an idea, a picture in their head about what that success is going to look like, and I was no different. But when it was failing, I just wondered sort of, how do other people recover from setbacks, failures? Everyone's aware of, Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Thomas Edison, all these wonderful figures that are in there sort of in papers, in journals, in books, in articles. And it was a reoccurring thought. I sort of got another job and everything was going well there, but I still had this reoccurring thought. And because I had this reoccurring thought, I thought, actually, this is a calling to me to act upon this thought. And then I was like, well, how am I going to do it? I had no sort of, I sort of had to frame how I was going to do this. And then I love listening to podcasts. I think they're amazing. You pick up so much knowledge. You can get podcasts knowledge-based. They can be fun, entertainment-based. They can be interest-based. Ultimately, you pick up so much. And then I just thought, actually, I'll do a podcast. And I tinkered around with a couple of names. But ultimately, I settled for My Perfect Failure. I liked sort of the paradox of failure and perfect. So that's kind of where it came from, really.
Okay. So do you still do digital marketing?
Yes, so that's although I've recently been made redundant, so I'm on garden leave at the moment, but that is my background.
Okay. So why don't you talk a little bit about your background, your experiences over life, your professional and personal life, and how you got to this point?
I guess professional life has always been fun. So background, as I say, is digital advertising.
Mm-hmm.
I've sort of, which I enjoy. I'm sort of, background is generally sales based, so I'm generally always going out speaking to customers, building relationships, building rapport. I love the interaction. I love that side of the business or of my profession. And I guess one thing I guess that runs fairly consistent through that. Anybody that has a background in sales will probably be quite familiar with
Mm-hmm.
people saying no. So you get people say no to you quite a lot. So, which isn't great, but where I've always felt where people that work in sales have an advantage. If you understand that sales is difficult, you develop that resilience. You develop that ability to come back from setbacks and rejection. So that's definitely run through my working career. I guess another area that I thought actually just before we sort of jumped on this interviews, that one of, I guess probably about 15 years ago, I used to work in training. So what I mean by that is I would work for a training company, and I would sell technical training, soft skills training, Microsoft training to businesses. It could be councils in the UK, it could be advertising agencies, it could be colleges, schools, you name it, any business. So so essentially, it was identifying how I could help those businesses succeed. It was identifying where their challenges were and providing them with a solution. And my podcast is kind of about that. I definitely feel that a lot of people, challenges arise and they may not have a wonderful network around them, whether it be a coach, whether it be a mentor, whether it be a work colleague, whether it be family or friends. And I kind of see my podcast as a vehicle to catch people that potentially have slipped through the net, that don't have that mentor, that don't have that coach, that don't have that family member, that don't have that friend. That's really why I want to use it. And I think that it's a cliche, but I guess I connect with being a people person. I like interacting with people. I've always liked that. And I think in 2019 is, if you go on social media, it's all about positive images, some unrealistic, about success. People tend to post perfectly curated, videos or photos which show success. And I want to see people successful. That's, totally what I want to see. But it doesn't, that doesn't paint even a true reflection. Everybody has our challenges as well. And I think some people feel that because their life doesn't resemble those perfectly created videos or those perfectly created photos, that actually they're not successful. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that's kind of like a little bit about my work background and about the podcast.
Sure. So let me ask you this. Obviously, we are a sum total of our life's experiences.
Mm.
We all have experiences in our personal lives and professional lives, and hopefully, we're using that for growth. So when you look back at your own life, have there been pivotal moments that you remember that crafted you to be where you are today?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think setbacks really. I think setbacks.
And that's
So
fair too, yeah.
yeah, I think setbacks Because I think when we have setbacks, you kind of have to, as far as I'm, it's difficult at the moment because setbacks are quite emotional.
Yes.
And at the time, we can be quite inward, and at the time we might not see any light at the end of the tunnel. But I guess this is the key. I think that when the dust has settled, I think that we realise that we are quite resourceful, and actually we can come back from it. So I would say, to answer your question in terms of a pivotal moment, for me, it would probably be the startup job, not the tech startup job, not working out. That's what led me to putting My Perfect Failure together. And it's been amazing because I learned so much from speaking to people like you
Mm-hmm.
and all the other wonderful guests that I've had on the podcast. And also what's fantastic is connecting with listeners, audience. So like this weekend, I mentioned to you in the UK that it's been a bank holiday weekend, but I think it was Sunday, a friend I've not spoken to for probably about a year, she'd listened to an episode and she texted me and said that that particular episode resonated with her so much because, unbeknown to me, I've not spoken to her for probably just under a year, but she'd been on a course. The course hadn't gone according to plan. Some of the modules she needs to retake, but at that time she was just so downbeat. But listening to the podcast, she realised that actually failure. Well, actually, I don't like to call it failure actually, because I don't know. I'll answer this question after actually, but the episode I listened to just gave her the confidence and made her feel inspired to actually do those modules again, which for me was wonderful to hear. That's kind of, whenever I get those type of messages, it's total validation for the reason that I started the podcast.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And there was one bit that I wanted to say actually, and this is mine. Everyone's got their own interpretation or definition of anything, but I guess the podcast is about failure. My view around that is that failure is part of success. They're both interlinked.
Right.
So you have no success without failure or challenges. So failure to me only exists if we give up. So as an example, starting a podcast, totally alien to me. I had no background in podcasting apart from listening to podcasts. A lot of, friends, colleagues, probably are still thinking, we don't know much about the podcast, they haven't listened to it. What was Paul doing putting a podcast together? He's got no background in podcasting, so it just seems a little bit of an odd move. So if I listened to all those people that have, don't associate me with another industry, then I wouldn't have put it out. And if I didn't put it out at that point, Paul would have failed because he would have listened to other people's insecurities about not doing things that they haven't done before. So if we experience failure now, obviously I don't want to experience failure, but I interpret failure as part of the process, and I sort of embrace the learnings that come along with failure that make the podcast better, and will make it hopefully a better product for current listeners and new listeners.
Awesome. So let me revert that question. So Paul, to date, what do you believe has been the high point of your career or life?
High point of career? High point of career, I think, would be all the amazing connections that I've made through work over the years. So, I feel blessed to have worked with some amazing people that have taught me lots of work-related professional lessons that have taught me life lessons that have become, in many instances, close friends. I enjoy the discipline of work. I think work's great because the brain and the mind is a wonderful thing. And if we nurture it, we grow it, we get so much joy from learning and interaction. So getting up, whether you work for a startup, a corporate, or whether you work independently, even if you work independently on your own, you still connect to other people. So the discipline of connecting with people, and that I love. So, I to answer your question, to give you a sort of more succinct answer, the real sort of high point has been all the relationships that I've built over the years.
Coming back to your podcast, can you talk a little bit about the format and where it's all available, and what are your future plans?
Okay, so the format it's an interview-based format. So what I do is I seek out people like you, people that have got knowledge on the subject, that have expertise, that can bring that to the table and have tips, tricks, tools that I personally, because when I'm doing the interviews, I'm a listener, I'm part of the audience, so I can listen and learn. And obviously our audience are listeners and audience as well, so that the benefits that I get, they get the same. So that's the core of it. It's interview based, and it's fantastic. I've been lucky enough to meet some wonderful people and get some wonderful people on the podcast. In terms of future plans, the future plans are to grow it. I want it to become, I'm a month old, so I want it to become sort of, I'm ambitious. I want it to become more worldly, renowned. I'd like people to benefit from it. I want to hear the stories that I heard at the weekend. I've been lucky that I've heard that's just one story. I had even my nieces and nephews who range from 8 to 10. They love the podcast, and they ask me questions about, fixed mindset, growth mindset. Actually, they know about it, but some stuff about it which I find amazing.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, which is great. So it's lovely to hear that, and for them to be asking those types of questions, because I think, one of the challenges that I see is that when we're youngsters, we are born and we have lovely parents and we're looked after. Failure doesn't exist, but somewhere along the line it becomes a part of our lives. And I think that what I'd like is ideally for schools to pay more attention to this, and parents too. So success failure isn't black and white; they're one and the same. So when challenges happen, whether i.e. failures happen, once we get a little older, I'd like younger kids or young adults to understand that this isn't the end, part of the process. Embrace it, take out the learnings, move on.
Absolutely. So I got a few questions for you, Paul. I'm just going to kind of ask you one after the other and just tell me what comes to mind, okay?
Okay.
So what are you most thankful for?
Definitely health, because without health, I won't be on this call to you now. And if we have health, everything is possible.
What are you most scared about?
Good question. Like a year ago, I would have said failure. What am I most scared of? Maybe discipline, not having discipline because I think discipline is incredibly important in whatever we do. So what would alarm me if I don't have discipline to make this happen? I think that, the more we do, the more good stuff comes.
Mm-hmm.
So, of not being disciplined,
Sure.
which I have to, the more we do, the more good stuff comes. So if we're disciplined, then our journey will be a good journey.
What are you most happy about?
What am I most happy about? I guess I'm most happy about, on a selfish level,
Mm-hmm.
I'm probably most happy about right now, because this podcast is fresh, early days. What makes me most happy now is speaking to people or getting messages randomly from people that have listened to a podcast, and it's been a positive impact on them. So again, similar to an answer I gave earlier, it validates what I'm doing, and because I get that validation, it helps with my discipline, actually, because it keeps me on track, because it's doing what I wanted to do when I had the idea 2 years ago.
Sure. And what do you look forward to?
Okay, so I guess a number of things. I look forward to more life experiences. Ideally good, but in line with the podcast, if when the sort of the challenging points happen, I know to embrace them and to reframe and move on and take out the learnings out of those situations. This isn't easy stuff, by the way. Just for listeners, it's kind of, and I'm definitely going through that process. It's kind of, I guess it's in line with what I said earlier, with discipline to take a moment
Mm-hmm.
once sort of the negativity is happened, and then think, actually, I need to press the go button again, take out the learnings and move on. So it doesn't happen overnight, and it's a continuous process. But yeah, so that would be one.
All right. And what would you like your legacy to be?
Okay, my legacy. I'd like my legacy to be one of positivity, but I guess somebody that cared. So they would think of me as somebody that cared.
This is great. So, Paul, for the listeners, obviously I'm going to include your handles and details about your podcast in the show notes, and we'll make it available for them. But meanwhile, what would be the one thing that you would want to leave with listeners of Plan B Success as a takeaway?
Okay, so I think I'm going to steal an idea from a guest that was on one of my episodes, Beth Comstock, who was the former chair of General Electric. And she's got a fantastic book out, actually, called Imagine It Forward. So the takeout is permission slip. So whenever we've got doubt or fear, we need to give ourselves permission to actually make that decision, to ask that question. If your boss is saying to you he wants 2 pieces of work in simultaneous deadlines, and you know that's potentially not achievable, or to deliver that work at the standard you want to deliver, instead of just giving them that work knowing they're not going to be at that standard, just have that conversation with your boss and say, really keen to get these pieces of work done, but given sort of the deadlines, which one would you deem most important? Because in order for those pieces of work to be delivered at the standard that I know that you want, I know that it's going to be a challenge to fit them both in that time frame. So which would be the most important one? That's just one example. There could be I don't know, it could be a discussion with your partner about something. It could be anything. But the idea of a permission slip is to just give yourself a permission to do something that normally you would not do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining with us today. This has been a pleasure learning about you and your podcast and your aspirations for it. Wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and it's been wonderful to be a guest on your podcast. And I love your podcast. In the last couple of weeks, I've been listening to episodes. So definitely, I'd encourage any listeners out there to subscribe to your podcast, because a good podcast to me is a podcast that makes you think and teaches you stuff that you didn't know previously. And all the episodes I've listened to, yours does that. So thank you for putting out wonderful content.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
All right, everyone. I hope you liked that episode. Just like you heard it from our guest, there's a lot of intriguing, thought-provoking content on Plan B success. A lot of things that inspire you to think, that inspire you to learn. So make sure you check it out. Plan B Success, the podcast, on your favorite platforms, or you can go to planb.live as well. By the way, I did want to talk about the book, My Inspiration. My Inspiration book is out on Audible. The audio version is out there. And if you're ready to sign up for a 30-day risk-free trial with Audible, you can download the book for free and listen to it. It's My Inspiration, Quotes That Shape My Self-Improvement Journey. It's available on Amazon and Audible. Thank you very much.